welcome to the Esports Performance Summit. My name is Brian Bain, and I'm here with our special guest, Christopher Missimo. Chris, welcome to the summit.
Good to be here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Chris, do you mind giving us a little bit of background on yourself as far as what you're doing currently in esports, and then we'll kind of get into some more background as far as how you got started.
Okay, sure. Currently in esports, I'm trying to implement a psychological model that I created. I created it 3-4 years ago now, but it's more formal today. So my business was officially founded in February of 2018. But the model itself was created when I was in grad school. So right now what I'm trying to do is take that model and implement it in the esports scenes, more for coaches so they can gauge the mental and psychological health of their esports athletes in real time without the need of a professional being present, but also for the players themselves to do the same. But the idea is give it to the coaches. Instead of having to spend time with everybody at once, the coaches can give it to the players, and then we can kind of be hands off. But it gives what it does is it allows it gives a very simple, clinically backed model of 4 different pillars that coaches and esports athletes can look at on a daily basis to gauge their psychological health, without needing any professional present. It works really well with high-level functioning to maybe below average functioning, and then it kind of falls off. It's not really designed for people, say, with schizophrenia or very clinical problems, but for normal, quote-unquote, normal functioning individuals, it works extremely well. It's founded primarily in sports psychology literature with a little bit of social psychology flair to it, but I have transferred it over to multiple different areas, parenting, esports, so on and so forth. So right now I'm a therapist in private practice in Colleyville, Texas, working at Psychological Services North Texas. I'm the marketing director there and a therapist. But then again, like I said, I have my own business where I do this type of training, and then I do strength and conditioning training as well. So that's what I'm doing right now.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited, like I mentioned before in the interview, before we got started, to really dive into the mental health piece, because I feel like there's just a tremendous need there. And so I'm really excited to hear about your model and some things that you're doing. Could you talk to us about your background a little bit in terms of, like, how did you get into gaming? Were you in the gaming before? You got into it through your mental health roles and things like
gaming. Always been a gamer. I think that's just the classic example of, I grew up I'm a 90s baby, so I was the N64 days, through the original PlayStation, original Xbox days, and so I've just always been gaming, but I didn't really get into the gaming space professionally until probably a little over a year ago, because most of my time was spent either with general population or with athletes. So a lot of my background, I played sports in high school, and then I played rugby in college, and for a little bit, and then I had an injury and that kind of screwed everything up, but that's a different story. But my passion really started with more traditional athletes. But what I found, and that's again where my research background in grad school was, which was health and exercise psychology, which was with athletes, traditional athletes, but I found that they were extremely transferable with esports athletes, that there are significantly more similarities between the two populations than differences. And so my kind of expansion into esports, into gaming more professionally, started probably just over a year ago when my business was officially founded, even though the business idea and again the model had been around for multiple years. I do Twitch streaming too. I would very much call myself an amateur Twitch streamer. I don't have the time I'd like to commit to it, but I do have a Twitch stream. This is where I do my setup. But I've always loved gaming, and I see a need there because I don't think it's a stretch, honestly, to say that within the next 10 years, that gaming could easily supersede traditional sports in revenue, easily. And I really don't think that's a stretch. We every single year for the last, I think it was like 8 years or so, if you check like Dota and tournaments of those types, we've seen an increase in pop prizes. We've seen an increase in viewership. We've seen an increase in the amount of
you said increase in pop prices. Is that what you said?
Pot prizes. So like financial outcome for the players. So we know the money is there.
Gotcha.
I mean, a lot of esports athletes are making significantly more money than WNBA players, and the WNBA has been around, I think, for 23 years or 24 years. Esports have not been around, not in the sense that we know it today, for that long,
right.
And yet they're like light speeding ahead of the WNBA and other forms of professional sports as it is right now. So in 10 years, I really do think that this is going to be a population that needs preventative care. Most of our country, unfortunately, waits until there's a problem to react
Right.
to. We wait until we go to McDonald's for 20 years, and then we have diabetes to stop going to McDonald's.
Right.
What we need to do is we need to get on the front side of this. It has taken off, but I really think, again, in the next 10 years, it's going to be a totally different animal. And so I'm trying to get in now to get this system in as many places as possible to be used as a preventative care system, and that's what RAMP is for.
Tell me the name of the business again. You just said it, but can you?
So my business is Missimo Motivation LLC.
Okay.
So it's all about combining mental and physical health resources for. It was designed specifically for athletes in the beginning, but again, it has expanded to esports athletes and traditional athletes. But I work with general population.
Nice. So let's talk about. There's a couple of topics we discussed in advance that we could focus on. One was the need for mental health for gamers and content creators. And then, we want to talk about your model a little bit, and then also kind of some key takeaways for our audience, whether they're coaches or players specifically. So let's go back and start at the beginning with the need for mental health for gamers and content creators. Let's talk to me about what you're seeing now, what some of the problems are, and things like that.
Okay, so I'm gonna do this with a very broad brushstroke. So
Okay.
do forgive me if I'm making a lot of generalizations, but just for time purposes and based kind of on the scope of this interview, I'm gonna try to paint broadly. All right. So gamers, content creators, esports athletes as a whole, we'll go personality first, right? They tend to be more introverted people. They tend to be individuals who struggle more with one-on-one social interaction. In person. They tend to be individuals who are more agreeable on the big five personality traits. They tend to be low in narcissism. They tend to be certain ways personality wise that, again, I don't really want to dig into too much right now just for time purposes. But those come with their own set of struggles. Any subculture kind of has its own flair to it, its own generalizations of need. The athlete subculture, traditional athletes have, that rub dirt on it type of philosophy. They tend to have a certain personality type assigned with them, but so too do gamers and content creators and esports athletes. So just based on personality, social interaction, whether that be really the more fundamental stuff, which isn't usually an issue, like social cues and social skills training, is something that I see more to like the more average stuff, which is I feel more comfortable talking to people behind a camera than I do in person. I have trouble sustaining long-term intimate relationships. It's not that I don't want them, but I have trouble doing that. I find myself spending a lot of time with my computer or my screen versus with other people. I don't have a desire to spend time with other people. Things like that I see a good amount. And then you have the more physiological stuff. So that's the basic. I sit and I'm sedentary for a long period of time. And we know that psychologically, going back to my health and exercise research, that's extremely unhealthy. You have to be active for your brain to get certain neurochemical and neurotransmitter release that you can't get from sitting down all the time. Doesn't mean you have to become a bodybuilder, a power lifter, but you do need to be active to some degree, even if that's just walking around the block or doing something. Long levels of sedentary lifestyle can cause numerous issues. So I would say personality-wise, and then you take those personalities and you put them on teams. So in the case of esports, not so much with content creators or streamers who do things solo, esports athletes have to work within a team. So making sure that those personalities gel when you have a general broad stroke of personalities that tend to not want to go together, that's really important for success. Take the Overwatch League. You guys have to be on the same level, on the same page, and the same wavelength to be successful in the Overwatch League, or you're just going to get crushed. So making sure that personality-wise teammates are all on the same page. I'd say so. Those are some of the things that I see the most of. But it's very broad. I'm trying to stay within a lane just because of our time. But I would say those are some of the things I see.
No doubt. I mean, this is a topic that I think we could spend a ton of time on, of course, and hopefully someday we'll be able to. But one thing that I'd like to address a minute is you already mentioned the phrase preventative care. And that's come up in other interviews for the summit already, and I guess I just want to lean into that a little bit because like I said, most people just we're really good at pretending like we don't have problems. And then those problems become bigger problems until you can't ignore them anymore. And then curing and fixing things is way harder than preventing them.
Mm-hmm.
What are some signs or some things that, again, generally speaking, that our listeners and their coaches could have in mind to realize, hey, I've got these are warning signs that something's wrong, and I should probably be making some changes or seeking some help, maybe.
That's a great question, because that's what ramp is. That's what ramp is for. Those are the signs you want to look for. So is it okay if we jump into that right
That's
now?
great.
That's kind of going to answer your question. Okay. So RAMP stands for relationships, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So I find that
hold on, I'm going to write relationships,
autonomy, mastery, and purpose.
Okay.
So the A, the M, and the P of RAMP come primarily from sports psychology literature. It's not that you can't find them elsewhere, but that's primarily where they come from. And then the relationships piece come from a lot of my social psychology research and background. But those are the four what I consider to be foundational pillars to not just psychological health, but success in any venture, albeit a coach, business, car salesman, whatever. I feel that if you can understand these four concepts of your life and better engage in them on a daily basis, like truly understanding the depths of them, then you will have success in whatever it is you're trying to do. So for a coach, what we want to do is we want to empower them and enable them to gauge easily, without the need for a master's or a PhD, right, in psychology or a related field, where is my esports athlete right now? How are they doing? If one of these pillars is off, it impacts the other three because they're interconnected. An example is, if I have a bad relationship with my father, let's say I have a very traditional father who is very standoffish and I want a better relationship with him. That's R, right? Well, if I feel like I have a father who doesn't empower me, I may not be as autonomous or independent in my actions and decision-making as I should be. If I'm not as autonomous and independent in my decision-making, then I can't master, another word for that is efficiency or skills, coping skills, business skills. I can't master those things of my craft that I need to master. And if I'm not mastering the things of my craft that I need to master, how can I possibly fulfill my purpose with whatever this venture is? I can't. So I went kind of straight through it, but you can interchange them any way. If one of those pillars is off, they will impact the other three. So for a coach, an easy thing to do is, they don't have the background in the research and the literature, but they can see, hey, John is having a problem with teammate Eric. Like, that's a relationship issue that needs to be resolved right now. Because if it isn't resolved, it will kind of slide into the other aspects of the model. Or, hey, John is struggling with the hours it takes to become really good at this Overwatch game. If he doesn't feel that he's facilitating some type of purpose with this game or with this career, he's not going to give you the time that you need. He's not going to be autonomous and take it upon himself to train without coaches telling him when to do it. Is he putting in the hours by himself? That's A. Is he listening to what I'm telling him? That's M. It's just a really easy, in my opinion, way for a coach to sit down, or an athlete to say, where am I at on these four things today? I hope that answered.
No, that's great. So, when you first mentioned an easy way for coaches to gauge, I was really curious if it was going to be what type of a platform it would be, but really it's just a skill set for the coach and other players to just have in their mind as they are operating with each other, as the coach is watching the team, and also as a parent is watching their kid, or in all those different settings, it sounds like. And as players are looking at each other, there's ways to realize, hey, I'm seeing X, which must mean Y. I wonder,
and it's the same language. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. Well, because I was going to ask, I wonder if I'd love to go through different examples of warning signs. Like you gave one example maybe just now, but because I think that helps again with that preventative care of people realizing as early as possible that there is a problem, or however you think it would be best to address that idea.
The warning signs, I think, so I was going to say that it creates similar language for like the teammates and the esports athletes. So beneath, and again, I cannot just for time purposes get into, I don't want to tangent you off all the intricacies of each R, A, M, and P. But yes, they're transferable for parents, traditional athletes, businessmen, and esports athletes. But the things you do within each pillar is more specific for that platform or that space, right?
Right.
So
There's a lot. I'm sure a lot of nuancing that happens between
right,
each
right, right.
vertical.
Which we can't get into today, but to answer your question, that's part of that nuance. So what an esports coach would look for may be slightly different than what a parent would look for with their 5-year-old, right? So what an esports coach should look for is, let's see, probably the number one thing I think of off the top of my head is withdrawal. Um, I'm painting with a broad brushstroke, so I do apologize if I'm generalizing anybody here, but you do see a fair amount, probably too much, withdrawal socially from gamers, content creators, and esports athletes. That tends to be their how would you put it, go-to coping skill, I guess. We call another word for it is stonewalling. When they're struggling with something in their life, their go-to tends to be, again, generalizing, blocking others off. It doesn't tend to be an outward behavioral action. Actually, that's actually what you see a lot with traditional athletes, football players who get very angry and abuse somebody or hit a wall. But with esports athletes, something that a coach could look for very easily is withdrawal and stonewalling. Now, withdrawal tends to be more behavioral, so like physically moving yourself away from other people, while stonewalling tends to be more verbal. So somebody's talking to you and you're just sort of ignoring them or giving them short answers. Those are two very easy ways for gamers, content creators, and esports athletes to kind of identify that something is off. That would be one example. I would say that I see a ton. So I hope that answers the question.
No, that's great. So in that case, and again, you did a good job of saying, these are generalities because obviously we don't have a specific case study in front of us or anything like
Sure.
that, or even a fictitious one. But maybe we could create one. I don't know. But so if I'm a coach and I see, hey, this player's withdrawing, and something seems different, is there how would you encourage them to move forward at that point? Like what is a good way to address that with that player?
Ramp, because you'd be speaking the same language. So here's the problem that you often find when trying to correct any issue in life is you have two people, one person may be trying to help another person who's in pain, or two people who are both part of the problem, and they're speaking different languages.
Right.
So in order for two people to come to a conclusion with whichever example we have, they have to be speaking the same language. So if I as a coach can go to my esports athlete and say, hey, we're going to talk ramp, let's sit down. What's missing here? They both are on the same exact page. So they're on the same language. They can communicate with each other with the same framework, and they get to a conclusion faster that way because there's less need for the coach to try to understand where the player is coming from because they're starting from a foundational understanding in terms of conceptualizing health in this moment. So that ramp, that's exactly where ramp would come in.
Well, and that really connects with me a lot because I've had experience with recovery programs in the past. You go through the program as a group of people with spouses together going through a program like that. And when you do it together, I know that's not quite exactly what you're saying, but going through that experience together gives you that common language. And so with my wife or with these other friends, we can ask each other questions and say things that someone not in the group may be like, that's kind of an odd thing to ask or say, or what do you mean by that? But we all just understand it. And I can definitely see the value of ramp in that sense. So I guess, and we may be getting in, I don't want to, maybe jumping ahead to your next point a little bit here. But so I guess really a starting point for a coach and teammates and others is to begin by educating each other on something like ramp. From the beginning.
From the very beginning. Hey, I'm the new coach, or I've been here for a while. Or maybe they just traded. You see trades a lot. So, hey, you're new to our team. Here's kind of a common language that we speak to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of happiness and healthiness. We speak ramp here, and here's what that means. It's just, again, I think it can change the landscape of esports health because it's clinically backed, it's empirically supported. It's simple language. Like everybody knows that relationship, like what relationships means. You have to dive into that a little bit deeper, but it's language that people already understand. That with a little bit of training, because like what I'm trying to do right now is I'm actually trying to take this model and certify it so I can train other clinicians to train other people in it. but it's simple language, so it's easy to train somebody in that. They will not become, a licensed professional, but they have what they need. They
Mm-hmm.
have enough to say, is this something beyond what ramp can help with? And if it is, now I know this is something that ramp can't fix, so we need professional help. But it gives them a very clear, okay, ramp didn't work, now we know it's professionally based, versus somebody coming in with a problem and saying, do we call somebody, do we not call somebody?
Mm-hmm.
This is a way for them in real time to say, this is something we can handle in house, or this is something that needs to be taken out of house. Yeah, I think it's going to be amazing one day. I really do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, like I said, I'm very passionate about the mental health space, especially when it comes to gaming. So no, I'm excited about what you're doing. And I think, so again, there's the significance of culture. And again, the preventative care piece here is for coaches. And we keep referring to coaches, and obviously that's kind of a focus a little bit, but I want to make sure, a lot of people listening aren't coaches. And so, or watching
Sure.
this summit aren't coaches. But really, and whether, again, while the nuances may change a little bit, if you're a parent, if you're a teammate, or you're just a friend of, you're friends of gamers, you're a gamer with other gaming friends, ramp sounds like something that could be a tool you can become better acquainted with, for maybe even again, before you have a problem, to say, hey, I heard about this thing called ramp, and here's the basic idea behind it. What do you think? I think this is kind of a, and I think just starting those conversations, if a coach, you have the authority to come in and speak it and
Sure.
set it as a culture, maybe a parent as well, but in a peer-to-peer basis, might be able to do that, but might be a little trickier. I wonder if you could speak into like some next steps or application pieces that maybe those different people, whether you're a peer, a coach, or you've already talked about coach a little bit, a peer, parent, or coach could take next.
Okay. Let's start with peer, I suppose, or colleague. I believe for any good team to work, they have to hold each other accountable. Any good team, any good locker room does not rely solely on the coach. And if they do, they are by nature not fulfilling ramp because they're not being autonomous, which is A. Okay, so a good team holds each other accountable just as much as a coach does when the coach is absent. So right now, you can sit down, set up an hour meeting this week if you're a part of a team, and say, hey, we're going to write this on the whiteboard. We're going to talk about this and where we each stand on each of these, what these words mean to us. We're going to get on the same page with our diction and with our syntax here, and we're going to understand how to hold each other accountable with our ramp to make sure we're on the same page. You could do that right now by just setting up a 1 hour meeting in a boardroom.
Mm-hmm.
Parents, I think it would be great. For some reason, my mind went to getting a giant chalkboard. I know some parents have like power stations or like scheduling stations.
Right.
Writing ramp on the board and making it very clear that the house is going to follow, the house as a whole, not just the child, is going to follow these rules of happiness and health, which is we're going to make sure our relationships are good. I'm going to demonstrate autonomy by modeling that to my child. I'm going to work very hard on mastering what I do, and I'm going to encourage my child to do the same. I'm going to empower them to work on the strengths that they already have, and I'm going to know why I'm doing what I'm doing and have that same language and that same conversation with my child so they know why they're doing what they're doing. You see this a lot with teenagers who don't care about school, and it's usually because the parent is talking to them through the parental language versus a shared language or the child's language. We're trying to convince them to care about school because you need school to have a good education. But what if they don't care about going to school for 7 years? What if they despise school and they want to work on cars? In which case, a trade would work better. Getting on the same page with that diction and that syntax and that rhetoric is very important for any household or program. But yeah, again, the nuances will change, but the model itself is transferable, and it's designed to be that way so that almost anybody can get something out of it very quickly.
Awesome.
When the training comes in, that's what will help with the nuances. That's typically why we go to the coaches, because they understand the nuances and we can kind of give that to them. But it doesn't require anybody necessarily to give you the nuances. You can start from scratch right now.
Well, and that's helpful, because that was going to be one of my next questions is, I can just imagine of all the people attending the summit right now, they're hearing this and thinking, man, I really need something like this, or my friends, my team, fill in the blank, whatever your context is. And then think, oh, I like what he said about sitting down for an hour with my friends, my teammates, to talk through some stuff like this.
Sure.
Obviously, someone without your professional background, here they hear ramp, think relationships, autonomy, mastery, purpose. Okay, you can kind of look up in a dictionary the meaning of those words, kind of get a general
Sure.
idea. We obviously we cannot spend exhaustively going through all that here. That's not, we don't have the time to do that, and that's not the point.
Sure.
But how would you encourage people to get more resources? I mean, obviously you have your business, and I mean, as far as your business goes, or elsewhere, how should they best learn more about this process and these tools to be just to get their language better?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you know,
That's a good question. My first instinct went, I don't know if I'd say unfortunately, but it went to actually reading the literature. So the thing about literature is that they tend to use the same language. That's what makes research valid and reliable, is that multiple scientists and professionals are using the same language, because when we change a word, it changes meaning, and when we change meaning, we change how we measure it. So if you can go to, you can go to Google Scholar and look up autonomy, mastery, and purpose, and find how they define that language, because that's how I define the language. I do it based on the literature. So if you
just
don't,
go look up autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Okay.
yeah, you could go to Google Scholar right now and literally type in autonomy studies, or like autonomy sports psychology. That might actually be better, because that's more specifically where it comes from. But you can type in those words right now on Google Scholar and find some documents on it and just start reading. My hesitation with saying books or just like Googling it is because, again, the definitions will change, and
Right.
the further away it's like playing telephone. The further away you get from the actual definition of the model, the more convoluted using it appropriately becomes. That's unfortunately why, to some degree, you may need to get a professional. That's why I'm trying to certify people in this, so they can kind of help guide, at least in the initial stages, coaches to get on the same page and then go. And the reason I keep saying coaches, by the way, is because it's time efficient to give the information to a coach and then have them deliver it to 10 players than to
Right.
spend time with 11 people.
Right. Right.
But yeah, I would say the best way is to stick to the literature. Unfortunately, I know that's boring, but it'll keep things consistent and accurate. So.
Well, and one of the things that, I think is made, and there are some phrases throughout the summit that probably will end up being somewhat repetitive because they need to be. One of them is preventative care. And the idea along with that is, when I was an athlete in high school, in our training room, there was this quote across the wall that said, "Champions do the little things that others don't want to do."
Right.
And right now, I think there's that tension again where you're spending all day in school or at your job. You come home, you eat real quick, maybe jump into gaming as long as you can, and then go to sleep and don't sleep enough, and kind of rinse and repeat that over and over again. But realizing that stopping that cycle, taking some breaks to grow in mental health dynamics like we're discussing here, and physical and other things like that from other sessions, can actually get you ahead further and faster in many cases than you may think. And a lot of times, by continuing to press through and tough it out, you actually may be literally doing damage to yourself, but at a minimum holding yourself back. And so being willing to differentiate yourself like that can make a tremendous difference. I'm wondering, as we sign off here, I have one other question that is probably way too big, and will be, you may have to generalize a little bit, or you may have to just punt, which is fine.
Okay.
Are there any key things that stick out in your mind where someone should say, "Hey, we should get a professional involved"? Because a lot of this is, there's some certification, but peer-to-peer and stuff, kind of like non-professional. But when someone says, "Hey, we need to we would be foolish to try to handle this in-house," and obviously wide open question, just some things that jump out at you.
Sure.
Maybe.
The first thing was obviously suicide or self-harm. Now, I told you withdrawal and stonewalling tend to be kind of go-tos for esports athletes, gamers, and content creators in general, as kind of a coping mechanism. Those are often very common symptoms of concern for self-harm and suicide. If you have the conversation about ramp and you know that it is not helping, that the individual can't engage in that conversation, then they would fall beneath that range that I talked about, that kind of above average health to below average. They'd fall beneath it. If ramp cannot help, it will tell you that this is something to be concerned about. And withdrawal and stonewalling are two very common components of that.
Mm-hmm.
Also, keep in mind that males are more successful with their attempts. Females attempt more, but males succeed more. Especially, a lot of esports athletes are adolescents, young adults right now, and they tend to, again, go back to the male and female. They tend to succeed more than the females do, and esports athletes are primarily male right now.
You say succeed at suicide?
Succeed at suicide and self-harm. So, and what I mean by succeed at self-harm is follow through with actual harm versus surface level, what we would consider to be passive or artificial self-harm, because there are differences in the way that somebody may hurt themselves to say that this is somebody who's serious or this is somebody that's trying to cope, because self-harm and suicide very much is it's a way to, depression is a past focused issue and anxiety is a future focused issue. And self-harm is a way to force self into present, which is why a lot of people self-harm. And it's not an intent to actually do harm so much as an intent to remove self from the future or the past experience that they're struggling with. So if you find any marks on somebody, or you find them withdrawing to the point where they will not engage in that conversation and ramp with you, I would absolutely call somebody immediately.
Absolutely. Great. Fantastic. Then that's really helpful, because I want to make sure that wasn't missed by any means, because I think obviously very important to keep in mind of, and remembering that, there's so many situations where we can write things off. We can say, oh, I don't want to make a big deal out of this, or it wasn't that big of a deal, and kind of explain things away. But just being smart and knowing that a lot of times the loving thing to do is to speak up to people who can help, and that even if the individual who needs the help doesn't want that, speaking up to a parent or a professional or someone can literally save someone's life. So
outreach is not weakness. Outreach, the desire to learn from other qualified people. I have I have 2 business mentors. I have a spiritual mentor. I have a financial mentor. Like, I lean on these people. You're never at a point where you can't learn from somebody else or benefit from the expertise of somebody else. Asking for help and advice is strength. That's how you grow. That's not weakness by any means.
A friend of mine has something he likes to say a lot, is that we all need more help than we think we do.
Oh, couldn't agree more.
And this is someone who has a significant position of leadership and influence, and takes that very seriously as well. And I think being able to normalize that more, just like you are with your example, I think goes a long way. So,
I listen, just real quick. I'm a therapist that goes to therapy 3 times a month on Mondays.
Awesome.
It's my profession, and yet I know that because health is a spectrum, I'm not afraid to say, let's make sure preventatively this doesn't become ever an issue that can be an issue. It's all about saying I'm not above help, even if it's my profession.
Awesome. Anything else you want to part with before we sign off?
Easiest way to get more information, to follow me on social media would be great. At CMISSIMO, and that's going to be for Twitter and Instagram.
Okay, say it one more time. Sorry.
Yeah, so that's at the letter C, and then MISSIMO, and that's going to be I have multiple usernames, but that'll be the easiest way to get in contact with me, because those are my primaries for Twitter and Instagram. And then my business website is www.missimo, MISSIMO, motivation.com. So you can get more information there. And if you don't want to hire me, that's fine. You contact me and I will get you in touch with somebody that can help you. Don't be afraid to contact me to get in contact with somebody else. If there's anything that I can do to help, just shoot me a direct message, email, whatever. It doesn't matter.
Awesome. Hey, Chris, thanks so much for your time today. Thanks for all you're doing to help gamers, and you appreciate you being a part of the summit.
No problem. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.